I drank 2 cups of green tea every day for 30 days. And I noticed some pretty serious things. Now, the truth is, I've been drinking 1 to 2 cups of green tea every day for a long time, but I'm talking about when I first did it. I kept track of how I felt and what things would happen to me. But the interesting thing is now when I look back and I have more scientific rigor, I go back and I can validate all the things that I was feeling with the legit science that's come out in the last few years. So here's what you can kind of expect, also based upon what I experienced. The first thing, I noticed that I was calmer, which was wild because it actually threw me for a loop because I didn't understand. I thought I was consuming caffeine. Why am I actually getting calmer? But then there were some studies that backed this up. There's the Osaka cohort study, which looked at 42,000 Japanese people. And they actually found that up to 5 cups of green tea, the more green tea that people had within that 5-cup range, the overall better their psychological distress scores were. They managed stress better, and it probably has to do with 2 things: the antioxidant component of green tea, but also the high amount of theanine. Theanine is something you don't build a tolerance to, and it's highly GABAergic, which means it influences that GABA state in your mind, which makes you more calm and somewhat sedated. So you combine that with caffeine and you're like, oh, I feel alive, but I feel calm. And that just made so much sense. That's one of the first things you'll notice because the effect of GABA is quick, especially if you're switching over from coffee over to green tea. Then you're gonna notice a major shift. The next thing I noticed, especially because when I did this, I was still battling insulin resistance pretty bad. I was type 2 diabetic for quite a while, and I was still kind of on the up and up. So when I started adding green tea in, I noticed that my fasting blood sugar had gone down quite a bit. Okay, I used to, at that point, I sat around like a 105 in the morning. I was still pretty insulin resistant. I'd say within about 30 days, I was down to a 98, 99. That seemed like a really aggressive drop. Now, there were some other things that factor in, like I felt more active, I felt clearer, I actually probably was making better dietary choices, so that matters. But then I noticed later on, it was just a nice trend on my HbA1c. Of course, if you look at a study now published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 17 different studies, some of which are randomized controlled trials, this big meta-analysis, green tea, especially the antioxidants in green tea, improve fasting glucose and HbA1c. So there's legit RCTs to back this up. This is what is so fascinating. Now, there's a lot of other things that happen. We're gonna go into the details of it because I noticed like anecdotal things that I'll now kind of cross-reference a little bit. But one of the things that I noticed the most is I felt like I was able to, I guess the way I could describe it is almost utilize fat better. I was able to go for more sustained distances when I would row or when I would run or when I would even just do upper aerobic work. And that resulted in more fat loss. And the cool thing is I was using devices, and I do continue to use devices to kind of see where my fat burning state is. If I'm really, really, really low carb, so close to keto, I'll test my blood ketones and actually see, is green tea getting me deeper into a ketogenic state? But if I'm not doing that, I'll use like that Lumen device I talk about. I breathe into it and it tells me when I'm oxidizing more fat. Bar none, when I am consuming coffee or green tea, I'm oxidizing more fat. I will say though, green tea, I seem to be in the fat burning mode at the same intensity a little bit easier, which makes sense because there's a pretty landmark study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that demonstrated that when green tea was consumed, fat oxidation went up 17%, meaning the body started to preferentially utilize fat. Now, if you just drink this and don't exercise with it, you're not going to magically lose fat. Okay, but if your fat oxidation rates increase, that's a prime time to go exercise and oxidize that fat. And you can measure those things by using something like a Lumen, right? You could breathe into that and see, okay, am I oxidizing carbs right now or am I oxidizing fat? So you can kind of see for yourself like where green tea or coffee is putting you. I mean, you can realistically find this the best time to train if you know when you're burning fat. Like if I'm using more carbs, that's when I might want to go resistance train and push hard or do sprints. If I'm oxidizing more fat, that's a prime time for me to go for a walk or crank the treadmill up to a certain incline and get some calorie and fat burn that way, right? I popped a link down below if you want to try Lumen. I definitely recommend them. That's a 15% off discount link. You use the code DeLauer, which is my last name. That link's in the top line of the description. It's a cool device. Like use it when you hike. Just use it to see if you're utilizing carbs or fat more before or after a meal. It just gives you insight because at the end of the day, I could give you all the science in the world, but we're all different people that have a different response. So having something in your hand that you can just breathe into in your pocket and just get a full readout, it's really awesome. So that link, again, top line of the description. The next thing I noticed is that my appetite was way less. Now, I was big intermittent fasting at this time, right? Now, and keep in mind, I was very overweight before, okay? So my metabolism was not exactly squeaky clean, right? I was insulin resistant, I was leptin resistant, and what I started to notice was that my appetite was controlled again. I didn't have this ravenous appetite. And the only sort of way that I can kind of link that together is either the caffeine was helping me, which is definitely something real, but also now there's evidence to support that green tea reduces leptin levels. Leptin is problematic if you are leptin resistant, because then the more leptin you build up, the more leptin resistant you become, and the more skewed your appetite becomes, and you don't know when you're actually hungry or when you're like really need food or not, right? It's difficult. Well, now there was a study published in Medical Archives. It was a rodent model study, but it was strong. They induced leptin resistance and obesity in mice by feeding them a really bad diet for a little while, for like a week. Just made them obese, made them metabolically unhealthy. They gave them varying dosages of green tea extract. The highest, in dose-dependent fashion, the green tea extract reduced the leptin levels and restored leptin basically sensitivity. The highest dose restored leptin sensitivity back to baseline before the mice were ever obese. Now, I'm not saying that you can magically restore these things, but this makes sense. Why, as time went on and continued to go on for months after that, the longer that I drank green tea, the more that I was just able to come back into grips with my appetite naturally. So I can't say that's what happened for sure. But I can tell you my experience. It controlled my appetite and made intermittent fasting really dang easy. But now I'm thinking, my leptin levels were definitely elevated. I was definitely metabolically damaged for being overweight for a while. This would make sense. Now, one of the big ones that people thought I was crazy for talking about, and I couldn't really put my finger on it, is I noticed pretty significant improvements in my gut health. Now, if you've watched my channel for a while, you maybe have heard me talk about the fact that I suffered from IBS really bad for a long time. I joke that I became an entrepreneur because of my IBS. It was like I couldn't really go to a regular job because I had to run to the bathroom all the time. It was frustrating. So I joke that it's like everything you see in front of you is a result of me having IBS. Like I built this because I needed to be close to a toilet. One of the things that I noticed is that green tea made a big impact on my just overall bathroom schedule and my digestive health. Well, if you look at the research in phytomedicine, we see, what do you know? Green tea actually restores the function of the epithelial cells, right, within the gut. So it's actually helping the gut lining repair itself. Oh my gosh. Not only is that important for, of course, digestive, but that's important for everything that has to do with inflammation and gut permeability. So we have a huge, huge benefit there. Then we also see that there's benefits in the same study for gut dysbiosis. So all these things that can lead to IBS, gut barrier issues, inflammation, gut dysbiosis, okay, can be potentially mitigated with green tea. Why though? It's the antioxidants. It's not that green tea is a magical caffeine drink. I mean, it's pretty cool. These are serious antioxidants and also the ability to upregulate endogenous antioxidants and block pro-oxidative stressors in our body. You sound like a crazy person when you talk about this and you shout from the rooftops with it, but when you see that there's just a study published in Frontiers in Nutrition, I think it was the end of 2023, 55 randomized controlled trials showed that green tea lowers total cholesterol, lowered LDL cholesterol, lowered HbA1c, lowered fasting glucose, ended up improving blood pressure, ended up improving almost all metabolic markers associated with cardiovascular disease. It is hands down one of the most powerful things we could consume. Now, I don't feel like such a crazy person when I talk about the benefits of green tea. Now, one other cool thing that I noticed is that I didn't feel quite as cruddy if I had a bad meal. Now, that could be subjective. It could be the caffeine. It could be anything. But there's relatively new studies that came out in Food and Function, which are really fascinating. They found that after short-term bouts of bad dieting, like after one bad meal, green tea mitigated the negative effects. Not from a calorie or weight gain standpoint, but what they did is they gave people a 56-gram of fat meal, a meal that just had a bunch of fat along with a bunch of other crap, I'm sure. Okay, and then an 8-minute stress test to kind of measure all these different things. Essentially, what they found is that when they gave people a flavanol drink that had like flavanols that are in green tea versus a low flavonol drink, the high flavonol drink had significant improvements in their overall flow-mediated dilation, their blood vessels, right? So the group that didn't have the flavonols actually had restriction. It decreased their flow-mediated dilation, it decreased their blood flow, it decreased everything associated with endothelial function of the vessels. Okay, and they tested this at 30, 60, and 90 minutes. But the group that had the green tea or the flavonols, they ended up being restored back to normal much faster, and after 90 minutes, we're actually seeing an improvement above baseline on their overall just endothelial health. What does this mean though? It means short term, it protects us from the negative effects of bad food. Long term, it protects our vascular system. Why? Antioxidants in green tea. And this is not like you can just go pop an antioxidant pill. This is something that comes with like the matrix of all these different, not the matrix like ones and zeros matrix, but the food matrix that comes with consuming green tea. All these different things. Geranium, which is a type of catechin. You've got obviously the epigallocatechin, the EGCG. You've got the various catechins. It's a complicated science on how this stuff works, but also the pro-oxidative blocking effect, where it's basically blocking the oxidative stress that can come from eating bad food. This is something that I noticed happen in the short term. Now, how did I feel? I felt like I wasn't getting that sluggish feeling after a meal. And what that we can take away from that now is maybe when you have a higher fat meal, having some green tea along with it could be hugely beneficial, right? Now, another thing that I noticed was significant cognitive improvement. And I mean significant, like sustained throughout the day without a crash. And actually found that my sleep was improving. And again, it has to do probably with the theanine, the antioxidants, and probably just the lower level of caffeine. But I felt like I didn't have these crazy rises and falls and these crashes that would come when I would have coffee. And I'm not opposed to coffee, I love coffee, but this is something that I definitely noticed. And the final thing, which is a little bit odd for some people to really talk about, is I noticed an improvement in my libido. Now, at the time, I was overweight and unhealthy, and I was transitioning into like my healthy lifestyle, right? So it could have been a number of things. It could have just been weight loss, improvements in insulin resistance, because we definitely see that. That can impair things down there. But what I noticed for the most part was that my overall just drive was back. And that has to do likely with hormonal systems, but again, inflammation. Now, at the time, I wasn't measuring a lot of biomarkers, but I know now that when I consume green tea, my inflammatory markers are significantly lower. But I'm a pretty healthy person and they're always pretty low. So I look at people that I know, close friends and family, namely one particular family member that added green tea into his life, and his CRP dropped significantly. Now, again, can it be a catalyst for making better change? Perhaps, but maybe it's just that little spark of an anti-inflammatory compound that people need to make them feel a little bit better and notice something different. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. Enjoy some green tea, and I'll see you tomorrow.